But basically, this is a one-shot scene. Again, it was done for time. But it works because these actors are so good. If you listen carefully, you can hear the dolly squeak on this. I mean, we were in a tiny apartment. We had no sets, and we had this wood floor. This building had been condemned, which is why we got to shoot it in it for free. But so whenever we did a dolly in this room, you heard squeaking. But we did it all basically in one shot, and it works. Again, I'd much rather have given the actors a few more takes to get their performance right, and I sacrificed the coverage. It's certainly not something you want to do as a director, but at the end of the day, people just take away from movies performance, and if the performances are good, you can get away with a lot. When you're shooting a movie in 18 days, you've got to make some very hard decisions. I mean, everything had been planned, but the fact of the matter is we had no time. So suddenly a scene that had 6 shots has 1 shot, but we can do it 6 times or 7 times until the acting is, right at the place you want to do it. Now, this scene sort of comes to an end. It's something that the editor, Adam Lichtenstein, and I like to call it the denial log, which means that the scene kept on going, but we decided to end it right where it was. And so we faded the sound very quickly, and then we had a slow picture fade. Basically an unnatural end to a scene because the scene went on, and it was a little boring, and so we basically just wanted to... So you can see her talking, but you don't hear anything, something called a denial log. This is... the first thing we shot on Canal Street, there's a Bayside Fuel and Oil van in the background that got us all our free vans, although you can barely even read the sign. We shot this stuff with long lenses in Chinatown. We had no permits for this. It was completely done illegally. And, and it's great because we're intercutting with Sam, who's so great in the scene. One of the things that we decided to do on this film was, since we knew we couldn't afford any looping or any post-production dialogue help, and since we were filming in very noisy New York City locations, what we ended up doing was we would shoot the scene until we got it right, and then we would have the actors, while we were setting up the next shot, record their dialogue a few times just directly into the microphone on the actual location. We'd have them do it like 4 or 5 times. And that was sort of our looping, because we would eventually find almost every line of dialogue clean enough for us to use, and then we would cut it into their mouths. And since it had been just after they filmed it, they sort of were exactly in the right spirit, and it fit in perfectly. This whole scene is done that way. Adam, our editor, just cut it in. So we have no horns going over the shots, and we have continuity of sound. And it's a really interesting way to do it. I've done it on much bigger films since then, because I don't really love looping. It can be done and it can be fine, but there's an antiseptic quality to it, and there is something about the energy of a performance right when it's happened. So this was definitely a scene where we got them to record it and shove the words into their mouth. Most low-budget films show their sort of low-budgetness in the sound design in many ways, because they don't have a lot of money to do it correctly. And we were very lucky on this film in that we had some really great people who were willing to sort of work crazy hours to get a pretty good sound design. We had great soundtrack music from Rolf Kent, which helped a lot. And then Adam Lichtenstein and Tom Lino, basically we homebrewed the sound design for this movie along with Tom Jacqueron, the mixer. We did Foley sort of on the sly, with us walking on different pieces of pavement to try and get the right sounds. Foley is sort of like sound effects. We loop grouped. It was basically me and Adam doing almost every crowd voice in the film. We sort of improvised a lot, and it ended up working fine. And a lot of this movie was sort of improvised, and it ended up working fine. I mean, this DVD audio track that you're listening to now was produced by Stephen Altabello, who produces big DVD audio tracks like The Last Waltz and other things by Marty Scorsese. And I call him Marty Scorsese because we both went to NYU. But we're doing this track in his living room with borrowed equipment. Much of this movie was made that way, with good people giving their time. And it was interesting. I've done bigger movies since then, but there was sort of a thing that I loved on this film, which was sort of a can-do spirit that sometimes bigger budget films have problems doing. I mean, people are being paid, that's one thing, and when they're being paid, they grumble. When you're not being paid, you can't really grumble because you're choosing to do it. And also, we were a team of about 30 people, of which I was the second oldest. They were very young people. I was 29, 30 at the time, and most of the crew was 24, 25. And there was definitely a spirit about that I've tried to capture in my other movies. I've never really done a huge studio movie, but in a $1 million movie or $3 million movie, there's something about the sort of, you can move quickly, you can be more improvisational, you can go off track a little bit more. There are scenes in this movie that basically Sarah, the DP, and Wex, the AD, and myself, and John Rubinstein would just go and sneak a shot off while the crew was lighting or something, and they didn't even know. On a big studio film, that could never happen. But we were able to be shooting constantly, and to have, if someone had a good idea, we just did it. And while we didn't have any money, we were able to do that sort of stuff. And believe me, that is something that I'm very happy about. And since this movie, I've sort of looked back fondly on this experience and quote it all the time, much to the annoyance of most people I work with. This scene in the hallway between Chris Quinn, my friend who plays Joey the driver, and John, is one of the simplest scenes in the movie. It's just basically 3 shots. The 2 close-ups are very long lens close-ups. I think it's like a 150 or something, but they look fantastic. And the intimacy of it, the connection between these 2 guys is pretty right on and pretty works well. And it kind of goes with the whole sort of spirit of the way we were shooting the movie with the long lenses. And plus, by using this, we didn't have to have all those extras the whole time. We didn't have to feed them. We could pretend that there's a room full of people through sound effects and really have no one there. We're about to head to the sequence at Flushing Meadow Park, which was originally scripted as the Bronx Zoo, but we couldn't get the Bronx Zoo, mostly because they wanted money, and any place that wanted money was just an impossible thing for us. So our locations manager, Genevieve, suggested Flushing Meadow Park out near Shea Stadium in Queens, New York, and it had really never been used in a movie before. Subsequently, a year or 2 after our movie was played the festival circuit, I saw Men in Black, and they shot right there and used it to great comic effect. But before then, it really hadn't been used, and it was a very fresh location in New York, and also very visual. It's kind of crumbling and falling apart. So, the Bronx Zoo would have been great, but I don't know how we would have controlled all the crowds or anything like that on a movie like this. This actor, Rick Gomez, was one of the runners-up for Sam Rockwell's part. We just thought he was a little too young, but I wanted to get him in the movie. And the girl who plays his girlfriend is my friend Judy Goldschmidt, who's a writer, an actor. So we shot all of this stuff, and as you can see in it, there are a lot of sort of zooms again, and certainly coming up will be this sort of shock zoom into John Rubinstein, which was, again, Sarah and I almost being comical in our love of zooms. This is a dolly shot with a shock zoom at the end, right into him, as you can see. In the following scene in the apartment where Jane, who plays John Rubinstein's ex-wife, realizes that he's run out, which is this. I really hate the fact that Phil is eating an apple. I know this is comical, but this drives me more crazy than anything in the movie. I tried to cut it like 20 times, but we kind of needed this scene. I love having actors eating because it just gives them something to do and it makes it realistic. But he's supposed to be with the FBI, and he looks like he's not even working. I mean, if he had been sitting by a computer or something, eating an apple would have been fine. But I look at this movie, and there's a million things I would change, but at a certain point, what can you do? This always gets a laugh, this little kid, and John asking him, do you want some candy to get rid of him? It's so funny, in thrillers, you can get a laugh from an audience so much easier than you can get a laugh from an audience in a comedy. In a comedy, people are expecting to laugh, and they demand that you be funny. In a thriller, people are sort of tense, hopefully, and they want to laugh because it relieves tension. I've done both comedy and thrillers and dramas, and it's pretty interesting. A well-placed joke, even if it's slightly lame, will get a huge laugh in a thriller just to relieve some tension. We had John Rubinstein running like a maniac this day. We basically did about 60 shots in one day, which is insane. I mean, we just started in the first light and went until the last bit of light in the sky and shot this entire sequence. And John was running around like crazy, and he had no stunt double. He basically did every single bit of running himself. He's breathing heavily in this shot, and it's because he's out of breath. And he was wearing the wrong shoes, and he was in pain. And he didn't complain to anyone but me. He whispered in my ear at one point, like, I can't do this anymore. Thankfully, it was at the end of the day, and I think I still made him do it a few more times. This was sort of an interesting day for me, a huge day for me on this film. It was about 2/3 of the way through, and it was our last exterior location, this sequence. Now, that might not mean much to you, but to a movie like this, it was huge because the film took place in 24 hours, in almost less than 24 hours. And by the way, this shot, which is beautiful, was sort of stolen. We just saw it, and we just sent John to run and got it while the crew was setting something else up. We needed the same weather for the whole movie, meaning that if it was snowing in one day, the next day it had to be snowing, or else the continuity would be bad because it was supposed to be 10 minutes later. And if it had, if the ground was covered with snow and then suddenly it wasn't covered with snow, it would feel weird.